Populations of the Russia-Ukraine war has been ongoing for more than 3 years now. When Russia launched invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, not many assumed that Kyiv would be able to stand against the mighty Kremlin. But Ukraine surprised many. However, this story is not about the grit and determination of the Ukrainians, but of the British military chiefs who did not leave any stone unturned to help Kyiv in the tumultuous times. This can be understood from the fact that in the early summer of 2023, the Ukrainian army launched its long-awaited spring offensive code, named after a famous British politician. The Wallace Axis referred to Ben Wallace, then Defense Secretary, who had played a leading role in getting Ukraine the weapons it needed in the early days of the war. His support led to the affectionate nickname, the man who saved Kyiv. According to one Ukrainian military source, quoted by The Times, while Britain's unwavering support for its Eastern European ally has been no secret the extent of its involvement and influence, last-minute dashes to Kyiv helped forging battle plans and collecting vital intelligence on the Russians has remained largely hidden behind closed doors. The Ukrainians referred to Britain's military chiefs as the brains of the AP Putin coalition made up of America, the UK, and dozens of other like-minded nations. Most crucially, The Times revealed, as the Americans provided the cream of the weapons to Ukraine and the precise targeting data to use them effectively. It was British military chiefs under Operation Scorpius holding Washington and Kyiv's difficult relationship together. Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, Wallace, General Sir Roly Walker, General Sir Jim Hocknull, and Lieutenant General Charlie Stickland held the front so that Ukrainians could march forward in 2023. Despite Biden's efforts, the united front of Ukraine's allies seemed to falter. It was during this time that Ukraine saw an opportunity to retake ground in the Donbass region and change the dynamics of a grinding battlefield. But it was not going well. It was at this point that Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, a state-educated boy from Oldham, and his two principal lieutenants, Lieutenant General Sir Roly Walker and Lieutenant General Sir Charlie Stickland, cemented the respect of the Ukrainians and Americans alike. The story of this pivotal moment and the role Britain played, however, begins some 6 months earlier. On December 23rd, Radakin received a phone call from his U.S. counterpart, General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The Ukrainians had made clear that in the coming spring of 2023, they wanted to go on the offensive against Russia, something that came to be eagerly anticipated in public as the Spring Offensive. Both the Americans and the British, however, had their doubts that Ukraine was ready. It was obvious they were going to do it. A serving British military officer familiar with the discussions taking place around that time told The Times. So the logic became, if they're going to do it, then let's make it as strong as possible. During the December call, Milley told Radakin that the Americans had decided they would back the offensive and throw their full weight behind it by January, as about 50 countries met in Ramstein, Germany, to discuss Ukraine's military needs. Lloyd Austin, the U.S. Defense Secretary, announced that the U.S. and other NATO countries would ship a huge, wide-ranging package of heavy weapons to Ukraine. This shows our long-term commitment to supporting Ukraine against Russia's unprovoked aggression. It was deemed a clear signal that the war with Russia was expected to escalate. The White House then announced that the U.S. would send 31 M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine to help them push back Russian forces, reversing their long-standing nervousness at providing Kyiv with offensive armored vehicles. Britain, for its part, will become the first Western country to provide Ukraine with long-range Storm Shadow cruise missiles to boost its chances of success, Wallace said. UK troops were secretly sent to fit Ukraine's aircraft with the missiles and teach troops how to use them. It would not be the first time British troops had been deployed on the ground, that a few dozen regular British troops had already been sent to Kyiv to instruct new and returning military recruits to use in a next-generation light anti-tank missile. British supplied anti-tank missiles that were delivered in February 2022 as the invasion was just beginning in May. British Army General Sir Jim Hocknull, the head of Strategic Command and former Chief of Defense Intelligence, met Kerry Low Burden of Ukraine's military spy chief. They discussed how they could work together to achieve the objectives of the fight back. Hulk and Hold had highly sensitive military assets at his disposal. Hocknell was instrumental with Wallace in ensuring the Ukrainians had the new laws in place before the invasion. That A.S. Walker and Stickland were able to help with the planning. Hocknell, operating in the shadows, brought intelligence on the Russians to the table. They needed enough information to be effective in what they were doing. They needed the edge against a numerically superior adversary. When Ukraine launched its counteroffensive in early June, tensions quickly emerged between Kyiv and its Western backers. British Chief of Defense Staff Admiral Sir Tony Radakin and his American counterparts had urged a strategy of starve, stretch, and strike. This meant targeting Russian logistics, spreading enemy forces thin through multi-axis feints, and concentrating Ukrainian strength. At one decisive breakthrough point, one such feint, codenamed Wallace, was enabled by then UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace, who had been instrumental in fast-tracking key weapons deliveries like Niklaus tanks and Storm Shadow missiles. Despite Wallace's push, he faced internal resistance from the UK's Foreign Office and Ministry of Defense, which feared escalation after Moscow's March decision to deploy tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus. However, President Zelensky, swayed by ground forces, Commander General Alexander Biscay diverged from the strike element. Rather than concentrate forces for a southern breakthrough to sever Russia's land bridge to Crimea, Kyiv opted for simultaneous offensives in the north and southeast. This diluted their effectiveness, and the expected punch-through never materialized. Frustrating U.S. officials, American commanders, including Generals Mark Milley and Christopher Cavalier, were critical of Ukraine's slow pace. But Ukrainian forces said their Western allies had underestimated Russian defenses. Massive minefields, fortified positions, and the deadly use of drones. General Valery Zelazny, Ukraine's top commander, cited morale issues and explained that older conscripts were rotating off the front line every 3 days due to the harsh conditions as friction peaked. Radakin broke off a holiday and traveled secretly by train to Kyiv, aiming to mediate. He planned to listen to Zelazny, then explain Ukraine's position to the Americans via video call from Kyiv simultaneously. Lieutenant General Charles Walker, a respected British strategist once wounded in Afghanistan, worked behind the scenes. Popular among Ukrainians, he was seen as a mastermind of UK battlefield ideas and nicknamed the general in pink trousers for his unconventional dress. During a key visit alongside Wallace and Radakin, Walker firmly believed Ukraine could endure and repel Russia's invasion, defying early predictions of collapse. Though the spring offensive fell short of expectations, Britain's military support remained resolute, contrasting with growing American impatience. In August, British diplomacy brought Ukraine and its allies back on the same page. Admiral Radakin, General Zelazny, and U.S. General Cavalry met on the Polish-Ukrainian border, holding a 5-hour meeting to reset counteroffensive plans and coordinate for winter and beyond, signaling continued U.S. commitment. But trust remained strained. That same month, Ukraine launched a cross-border raid into Russia's Kursk region without informing the U.S. or allies. A Ukrainian source cited fears of leaks, recalling the April 2023 exposure of Pentagon documents detailing Ukraine's plans and ammunition shortages. Operational secrecy was now a priority, even among partners. Over time, Britain and the U.S. eased restrictions on Ukraine's use of long-range weapons like Storm Shadow against targets inside Russia. The hub for Western arms coordination shifted from an old W due to building in Stuttgart to a U.S. base in Wiesbaden. Joint war games continued with British and American commanders assessing supply needs and offensive strategies. Admiral Radakin, taking on a broader role than previous UK defense chiefs, led cross-government efforts on Ukraine. In August 2020 for Ukraine, launched a surprise incursion into Russia's Kursk region without informing allies. Fearing leaks like the April 2023 U.S. intelligence breach that revealed Ukraine's ammo shortages and battle plans, trust remained fragile. General Walker, now Chief of the General Staff, applied 2023 battlefield lessons to reshape the British Army into a more agile, lethal force. Radakin, expected to step down in autumn after 4 years, has met Zelensky around 10 times. Zelensky calls him the Admiral, a nod to his unique background. Their latest meeting on April 11th in Kyiv included discussions on a proposed UK-French reassurance force for Ukraine in case of a peace deal. Britain and France convened a defense ministers' coalition of the willing meeting in Brussels on April 10th to discuss the plans with 50 nations. John Healey, the UK Defense Secretary, stated while today's discussions will be private, our planning is real and substantial. Our plans are well developed. On April 11th, at the Ukraine Defense Contact Group meeting in Brussels, more than 2 years since the gathering in Ramstein, where Austin pledged extensive support, Healey and his German counterpart, Boris Pistorius, will take the lead. Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Defense Secretary, will dial in from the U.S. rather than travel to Europe to discuss how to arm Ukraine next. The UK has been keeping Ruck's support even in the darkest hours when Washington's support for Ukraine dwindled after Trump's inauguration. Starmer organized a London summit on March 2nd to stand by Kyiv and made the Coalition of the Willing, as it is known. It is a coalition of 31 countries which have pledged strengthened support for Ukraine against Russian aggression, going further than the support delivered by the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, by pledging readiness to also be part of a peacekeeping force deployed on Ukrainian territory, either by providing troops or contributing in other ways. The agenda was on top in the Brussels meeting as defense ministers of member countries of the Coalition of the Willing met on April 10th.